This is Greg Orloff with IoT World, and I'm here with Kiva Allgood, and she is the head of IoT and Automotive for Ericsson. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to connect.
Kiva, thank you again for joining us today. So, as the individual steering the ship on Ericsson's initiatives into the Internet of Things in the automotive sector, we hear a lot about 5G offering a game-changing solution for global connectivity and edge and fog computing. What challenges do you see that are coming along with this enabling technology?
So I'd say I'm fairly unique in that regard from the standpoint of I joined from GE. A lot of the projects and programs I worked on there were launching new companies really focused on digitization and digital transformation. So worked a lot on specifically on launching new companies within GE that focused on those two things and aspects. And then prior to that, I was at Qualcomm and I led their smart cities and IoT product line, and that included both software as a service and silicon requirements. So, a lot of focus on smart cities initiatives in particular, focused on utilities, water, and sustainability initiatives. So I have almost 100 POCs underneath my belt in the IoT space. Some have gone great, some have not, as well as some pretty large global deployments. So I led the team on that was the part of this, which is now owned by Sidewalks Labs, but in New York City, the ripping up all the old payphones and putting in new infrastructure. It was my team that ran that bid from Qualcomm. So responded to the RFP, did 2 additional responses there. So I actually have a pretty extensive experience, unique experience deploying large city infrastructure that's actually connected in new ways. And that continues to be a passion of mine. So an area that I remain really, really focused on. And then to me, the question that you asked is interesting from the standpoint of, I think the product positioning around 5G has allowed and dispelled a lot of the previous reasons why industrial players just said no, right? They're like, the latency, it's too confusing. You're speaking a language I don't understand. So we go in there and we're talking all these things, and they tend to go, oh God, I don't even know what that means. Wi-Fi, I know what that is. I know how to turn it on. I know what the little bars mean. So I'm just going to go that route. They didn't view the wires as really being needed to be cut. So I think as you start to see the transformation of what's happening in a factory and the need to do smaller production lines because it's personalized, the need to be able to move equipment around to solve for that ask, really means that they have to think about using technology in a new way. But what I'd say is often players in the IoT space are approaching it not from the appropriate angle. And they go in cellular, again, anybody who works at a carrier speaks a language of 3 acronyms that is completely different than somebody who works on a factory floor. And I used to be a master black belt. I used to spend every single day in a factory floor. I know what they're attempting to do. If you're not helping them save money or make money, they don't want to have a conversation with you. Going in and saying, oh, I could do this great thing that would allow you to see through walls so that you could see if a light was, a pipe is broken, they'd say, yeah, it would eventually come through the wall and that's okay. So I think 5G, though, really has dispelled the fact that you can't use cellular in an industrial environment, because now you can future-proof and you get low latency and the same performance that you would from a wire. You get reliability and security, the same actually better from a security perspective than the traditional, factory floor implementations today. So that's opened the door. That has allowed a lot of, I'd say, the industrial players to say, oh, I can use cellular today where I couldn't before. It also allows you to go in environments that other technologies just won't work. So if you think about a mine, or you think about topography that is highly caustic and highly it vibrates a lot, you can't use Bluetooth and you can't use some of these other technologies. So again, I think technologically it's dispelled some of the easiest things that won't work. But now we've got to bring those industries along with us. And I'd say that's an opportunity for the players that work in cellular and 3GPP, again, a word most people in the industrial space don't know, to start to speak the industrial language. So we should be going to the NARUCs of the world, the National Association of Utility Regulation, and talk about how awesome cellular is and how it can solve things, and the fact that it's future proof, that you can do firmware updates and it can meet C1, D2 standards. So we have to go back to the language they understand. And I think if we do that, then technically 5G can really help. It can help immensely future-proof the deployment.
You touched on a lot of different topics. That was fantastic. You've got some tremendous experience too. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah.
I've got another question for you, if you're up for it. From our standpoint, it's always exciting to hear about how tech organizations are leveraging technology in their own operations. And I know that Eriksons recently implemented a plant in Louisville, Texas.
Yep.
Is that still key to go operational in 2020? Is that the?
It is. I don't know the dates. I'd have to rely on Karina and others on the exact date. But yeah, we've been working. I know the sourcing team and everyone's been working very heavily to continue on that path. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I guess part of my question is if we're talking about the IoT, it's an antenna factory. I know that as well, or a radio factory for the antenna system.
Radio, yeah.
But we've heard that they plan to make the factory 28% more energy efficient than comparable buildings. That was one of the statistics I think was thrown out there. So in addition to this challenge, I mean, what does a fully automated smart factory look like to Ericsson, and what tools do you plan to leverage to create this factory for the future?
Yeah, I don't know all of the tools, so I'm not the best person to be able to say this is that full, and I'm also not sure what we're talking about and not talking about, but I can give you my personal perspective on kind of what I see the future of a factory looking like, and then I can have Karina and team follow back up on exactly where we are and then what tools. But, I think a entirely wireless solution that allows you to augment a factory plan in a day is the factory of the future. That allows you to do remote control and monitoring, leveraging experts from around the globe, that uses AI to say when something's on being produced as per requirement, not. To me, it basically takes a lot of technicians and turns them into network operators, so that they can actually view and see the manufacturing floor and reconfigure it on demand based off of what they're seeing come in. So from my view, it's more sustainable in part because you're only using the energy that's needed at that time. But anytime you have a factory, you still have to have, depending upon what you're producing, if it's a clean room, you use a lot of energy, right? So how do you integrate that in with geothermal, with solar? And that comes a lot more to do with the construction of the building than it does necessarily with the manufacturing output of the building. So I think you really have to think about both of those in concert together. So again, what's the ultimate design and development, and then how do you get to a zero footprint on a daily basis with the output, and matching those two things together. And I think connectivity plays a role there. I think people play a role as well. I view, though, it's going to be super interesting to start to see when you're not retrofitting, it's an entirely different conversation than when you're doing a brown building or a building that already exists. Because you're changing behaviors, you're changing work patterns, you're changing current productivity schedules versus I get to do this from scratch. So what is it that I should expect? Should I get the 20%? Yes, that's what the numbers say. What I've seen in some other deployments is you actually get a lot more than that, because you change your way of working, and you are able to augment those workflows a lot more, and you get a lot more productivity than just the technology brings. So to me, it's a combination of both of those. That's the kind of the future of work, or the future of the factory. It's going to be a combo of just the ways of working as well as the industrial equipment.
Got it. Thank you. A huge part of IoT, is the fundamental principle of global connectivity. But taking that into account, what are your predictions or suggestions to our community regarding how do you balance security? Because cybersecurity is always a continuous I guess, factor that you have to deal with. How do you balance that with this increase in connectivity for IoT devices?
Great question. I think there it's interoperability and standardization. I mean, the fact that you can go around the globe today with your cell phone and make a call reliably, look at your data securely, is because we've been able to provide that interoperability and standardization across the network itself. Within Ericsson IoT, we've got a global network that's built on top of and partnering with our carrier partners that gets you localization. So you're not just roaming, you're actually able to get that higher quality and higher security because we have access into the network and we can provide that same level of security. So to me, I've actually seen a shift. So when I first started in IoT, it was all about connecting the thing, whether that was like a watch or it was, some small thing in your house. Now you're talking about huge transformative swings where you can do a flare stack inspection with a drone and a crawler. You don't have to shut the plat down at an exorbitant amount of cost. You can fly a drone into have the drone be a first responder. You're talking about a glucose monitor that someone uses every single day. That means you have to have highly reliable connectivity, right? It's not just you're roaming and maybe you may connect. You actually really have to connect. So the use cases have gotten a lot more critical, and as that criticality goes up, so does the reliability, and so does the need for security. Which means you have to have interoperability and standardization, which is the perfect place for cellular. So in my view, we're not talking about that enough, and we're not highlighting we have the ability to do threat detection on a cellular network, to do aversion, to shut things off in a leveraging machine learning and AI in a much more robust way than you do in either proprietary or non-3G, non-cellular solutions. So to me, as the reliability and the need for security go up, I think actually cellular is much better positioned because we can contribute to both of those and we can provide those type of service levels because that's how we work today, right? That's not an afterthought, that's how we operate. And from my point of view, we haven't done a very good job of talking about that. And in a way, it's also because utilities and some of the other major players that went and started to use IoT first, whether that's in a meter or a sensor, they had their own proprietary non-standardized and non-interoperable solutions, which also came with a lot of security risks. So I think there's proof that going in a standardized way increases that dimension tremendously because you have more eyes looking at it. And there's always going to be security threats, but the best way to prevent those is to have more people building products and technologies that are interoperable and that are standardized.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense. So talk to me a little bit about, I know you have 5 pillars or 5 trends that you've been looking at yourself.
Yeah.
Your perspective on sustainability. I mean, how does this factor into the equation?
Yeah, for me, this is one I'm super passionate about, and in part, I have a unique name. I did grow up on a commune, my parents, that was their religion, was going to the recycling center on Sundays. But to me, it's one where we have an obligation. So let's take water. So 50% of the water never makes it from source to tap. Why? Theft and leaks. Both are things you can detect pretty easily, right? PSI reading and maybe a few cameras. But even if you just took the PSI reading side, you could use technology to solve some of, I'd say, the biggest world problems pretty quickly. And to me, that it means you're increasing sustainability. And it also, the more information you have, the more insight you have. Think about if you want in a smart city, for example, you could easily route people to go clean toilets based off of the population that goes to see them. So that's something very quickly a city could tap into. The quinceañera happened here. You don't even have to need to know that. You just know 500 people were here and 2 were here. Let's route the cleaners of the 500 first and maybe wait to hit the one that only had 2. So people are on the road a lot less. You actually get a higher quality service to the people who live in that community. So I view additional insight and information as a way to unlock a lot of that potential and increase a lot of sustainability goals. Erikson's super committed to this space and also to the global footprint. One of the reasons why I actually joined Ericsson, there's a strong commitment to it across the board, both within the facilities and with its employees. But it starts with the mindset that the more information that you have, the better, the less of a carbon footprint you will have, right? Because you can measure it. And that goes even to, if you think about retail locations and being able to manage a sustainability initiative there. So Starbucks owns some of their buildings, not all of their buildings. They get a bill at the end of the month, but if they could monitor or know someone left a piece of equipment on, they could turn that off, right? So there's to me a huge tie with that insight that then allows you to deliver on a sustainability goal. And then in emerging markets, to me, that's also huge, because you're really aligning. If you look at the World Economic Forum's data or the World Bank, electricity, water, and connectivity drive GDP, right? Your access to those things. And so, and internet's now a part of that equation. You've got whole economies where the only currency is on your phone. And I think that's transformative for a lot of the emerging markets, and especially with the middle class and the emergence of the middle class in India. I think that creates a lot of opportunities in the industrial IoT space for sure.
No, interesting perspective. Thank you. And we touched on this a little bit in the first question that I asked you, but when you look at the industrial space from an IoT perspective, there's a lot of talk. Originally, there was a lot of talk about migration to the cloud. So we were looking at they take big data up into the stratosphere and do wonderful things with it. And I think as they started to peel the onion back a little bit more, you're diving now into the terms fog and edge. So what are the opportunities, from your perspective, not mine, but I mean, what do you see there as, from our community standpoint, where is the low-hanging fruit for cellular, from a 5G perspective?
Yeah, low-hanging fruit, I mean, anything that moves and anything that views. So if you need high throughput and low latency, cellular is a great option. I firmly believe it's going to be a hybrid solution. Like we talked about, if you've already got a deployment in a factory, they're not going to rip it all out and start over again. So how do you integrate and how do you look at it in a holistic fashion? But there are a lot of use cases, and cellular is standardized and it allows you to future-proof. You can do a firmware update a lot easier and you can track that. So we have to position cellular as the path forward. I think though, it's always interesting and always important to think about what's the outcome you're trying to drive. And then you should select the technology that helps you get there. But you have to think about it in the context of what the total cost of ownership is. How much does it cost to deploy? How much does it cost to manage? What's the life cycle management of that deployment? And then ultimately, do you have the people and the skill set to be able to maintain it as part of that life cycle? And if you can't really answer those, then I say go hire somebody that can. And so I think that's also part of the journey is, if we're evaluating an opportunity and they don't have a digitization officer or somebody who actually understands those 4 points, the likelihood of success is very low, right? And it becomes a POC, but it doesn't actually get deployed. And I think that's been one of the things about IoT and industrial IoT. People talk about it, but then it's really hard for them to internalize and say, well, what does that mean for me as a business? I'm a pharmaceutical company. So why do I need to keep track of all those lots and do all of these things? We can give you a whole bunch of reasons why. But we have to start actually transitioning in the conversation to what outcome are you looking to get? And is cellular the best option for you? And I'd say it increasingly is becoming that, because you can have a single contract globally and deploy globally. It simplifies your supply chain because now you have eSIM and EUICC. So you can embed cellular and then ship it anywhere globally and it'll localize and connect. And again, I think that localization is super important. The fact that you can actually connect and localize and be basically on the core network, not on a roaming network, and get that network insight, so you know when to do an update and not do an update because it's available or lower cost. All of those things are things that we think are going to be super important as you start to think about really how IoT is going to find its way into communities and services even more than it is today.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
So last question, we talked a lot about IoT, which is obviously our core point from an industrial perspective, but one of the other nuances, it's part of your title, is the automotive sector. So give me a snapshot of what Eriksons' vision is for the auto sector.
Yeah, I mean, we really view it as the best initial example of software-defined vehicle. It's happening. It's here. Look at Tesla and the money they saved in the last recall, right? Because they were able to do things remotely and manage it and orchestrate that. So a lot of, I think, the future of a vehicle and how people interact and the services they're looking to get out of a vehicle are going to be defined not necessarily by people driving the vehicle, but it's going to be your ability to interact with the vehicle via your phone. You call it to come pick you up. You play your music on it in a simplified version. You are able to share within a family and program it, across a family. So basically the vehicle, you have one vehicle, but it Ubers itself between family members. That means that you now have to have a software-defined vehicle that has the intelligence to be able to do all of those things. And so we're very focused on both the application layer that allows the vehicle to live in the space, both the V2I and V2X. I also believe that means that the infrastructure within the city is going to have to transform as well. It's going to have to become more intelligent. When I lived in San Diego, there were two lights that were actually connected. The rest, it actually took a person to call to tell you that the light was out. That's changed since then, but when there was fiber sitting right next to it. So you've got a lot of this infrastructure that just is outdated, but it can be, I'd say, a key ingredient to the smart city. So even look at what Link NYC did as far as when we rolled that product out, hugely rewarding, because when we were doing it, one of the deployments was next to a retirement community, and this woman walked out and said, "You just saved me half a day, because I used to have to get on 2 buses, go to the library just so I could download the shows that I like to watch, and now I just walk to the corner and I'm able to get that same service." So I think as more things become connected, and you'll start to see that CARE, and these are all acronyms within the automotive space, become more important. But then you have auto manufacturers who want to figure out how do they make sure they manage and monetize that in a different way. So you're going to see different services come in. They're not just going to, incur the cost but not get the benefit. So, but there's definitely a transition in the industry. Software-defined vehicle is actually something now people understand. You could design a window to roll down. You don't need the 120 vendors that there is today. You could probably do that with 5 and a slightly different electronics, right? And you could probably do it from your phone. So that whole mindset is starting to find its way into the tier 1s and tier 2s. Some of the tier 1s and tier 2s are going to be displaced, as you're starting to see in Tesla. But I think the ultimate vision is the interaction between vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to consumer, and vehicle to infrastructure. And that has to also be standardized and be interoperable. If every car manufacturer does its own thing, it's a disaster. So to me, there's a lot of work that's going on there between the AEC. There's a whole bunch of different standards bodies. Everybody's still a little too proprietary. I think they have to think a little more open and cross OEM, but it's where the industry is going for sure.
That does make a lot of sense. And you don't want history to repeat itself, because the auto sector went through that a couple of times already. So.
They have. They really have. And so I think they have to focus on how can they differentiate themselves. And there's a difference. I mean, I have a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old, and a lot of their friends, they don't want to drive. So it's, and well, depending upon where you live, like if you live in San Francisco, it's cheaper to use Uber all the time than it is to drive. So, you know, depending on your location, it definitely is different. And here in Europe, you can drink before you can drive. So everybody uses public transportation. But I'd say the vehicle, the way it looks today and how it operates, is definitely going to become software defined.
Yeah, so it's a massive amount of change heading down that line. Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah, and it's so fun to watch. And you've got some cities and ecosystems that are popping up. But it isn't about the technology. So if you think about Uber, TomTom had that tech capability before Uber did. I'm sure you know that story. But Uber wasn't solving the call, the order cab. What they were solving for is cabs were dirty and disgusting and people felt unsafe in them. And so I also think sometimes we say technology is a solution, where actually, no, that's a great example of not the problem statement, the business statement wasn't the technology issue. It was the fact that people didn't like getting in cabs. And so they found another way. And now it did simplify it, and it was a better price and higher quality. So I think you'll start to see those new business models pop up a lot too.
Absolutely. What you identify the root cause of what's the issue. That's nail on the head, I think.
And be honest with yourself about it, because sometimes technology isn't the solution. So I think even at Ericsson, you know, we are excited about the rapid deployment of things, but for my team specifically, we have to understand what benefit and what outcome does connecting all of those things bring. And without that answer, it makes it really hard to have the conversations with the enterprise. And we partner and sell through our CSPs, and they're not used to having that conversation either. So it makes it even more difficult. And some of our target enterprise or segments we're going after specifically don't enjoy having the conversations with the CSPs. So we, as an industry, we have a lot of work to do to think about that outcome and get our carrier partners and other folks to help the enterprises on their digitalization journey, because they're not about connecting things, they're about digitally transforming their business so they can make more money or save money.